What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the DK Garage. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Joe.
And that was a lot of fun, Joe.
We had a little bit of an eventful weekend there at COTA, Circuit of Americas in Austin, Texas. It was a lot of fun. It was a first of its kind, the inaugural race, and it was cool to take it in from the track. I know a lot of people in the Twitterverse and online kind of poo-pooed on some of it, but overall, the experience was fantastic.
It was really surprising to me just how different, like the way I thought the race was leaving COTA and then judging everyone's reaction on Twitter after the race and the next day and whatnot. I thought I was literally maybe watched two different races. They just uploaded the full race, so I haven't had a chance to watch the full one, but I did watch some clips and highlights that I didn't get to see, obviously, because sitting in turn one, you can see a large portion of the track, but you can't see everything, and a lot of the action happened where we couldn't see it. But I kind of get where some of the people who were watching on TV came from. Those guys definitely had a hard time seeing with all the spray coming up. It really wasn't that it was raining that hard. It was just the tire spray. And so I kind of get what they're coming from, but man, it really didn't feel like that watching in the stands. I thought it was an exciting race. I thought that I was hoping that for a little bit more green flag runs. There was quite a few caution laps, and obviously the fact that they didn't get the whole race in kind of sucked. But you know what? If you were going for Chase Elliott and had him in your lineups, you're probably happy that it ended the way it did. I know I am, because I profited a little bit. But still kind of a bummer. Would have liked to seen what would have happened in those last, 14, 12, something like that laps.
Yeah, 14 rain-shortened laps is what they left out there. There already was not very many Dominator points available in this race, so there wasn't anybody that really dominated. We had Kyle Busch and Joey Logano also both getting over a dozen laps led, which wasn't surprising. We figured Truex and Elliott would be really impactful on the race. Truex unfortunately got in that really bad, scary accident with Cole Custer.
Did lead 3 laps, though.
He did lead some laps, but that was in itself one of the most scary accidents I remember watching, and I saw happen on the screen because it was out of our field of view. But still, it was one of those races that you'll be able to remember for a long time. I know Kevin Harvick came out and said some stuff about it from a driver's perspective, which I completely understand, and I know where he's coming from a driver's perspective. What perspective do you have as a fan? I know you've now been to the last 2 races you've experienced. They've been rain-shortened events.
I went to the Texas playoff race last year and was there for Sunday and wasn't able to go back because I lived too far away and, work. So didn't get to see the rest of the race in person. But my thoughts kind of after hearing, again, the surprise of I guess it shouldn't be surprising that Twitter reacted negatively, because that's kind of what Twitter does. But just seeing that everyone was kind of disappointed with COTA, I was sitting at it like, dude, we wouldn't even raced at almost any other track. Yeah, maybe if it was another road course, but if it was a 1.5 mile super speedway, we're waiting. And if it was in Austin, it would have been probably Tuesday before we got the race in. I think NASCAR trying to make these guys go out there and put on a full show for the fans. I mean, there was a lot of fans there. Don't know what the attendance was, but it was quite a bit, even in the rain, which kind of surprised me. We were there on Saturday for the trucks and Xfinities, and there was a lot of people there, and I was kind of thinking somewhere around like that or less because of the rain coming in on Sunday. But there was definitely a lot more people. But the point is, if they didn't try to run that race, everyone just came out for nothing. You would have had to watch it on TV later. Most likely only a few fans probably would have made it back during the week. I know a lot of people came from out of town, out of state. So the fact that, yeah, I get where Harvick's coming from, but also, dude, you are supported by your fans. The sponsors pay money to advertise to the fans. If there's no fans wanting to watch because it's rain shortened, who wants to watch, drivers just sit in the cars a bunch of commercial breaks with no action. Fans don't want that. They want to see racing. So I think that it was a good move from NASCAR to try to push it. I think they'll get a lot of good data from it. They can try to maybe, I know they've already tested some mud flap type apparatuses on the cars, and the following day, I think it was, at a different track. So to me, it's promising, because I hate when a race gets delayed, whether I go or not. You know, I'm setting up my time. I'm ready for the race. A little delay is okay. But, man, when you have a race starting one day, finishing the next, it's not a good look for NASCAR, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's just like a lot of the other major sports, we don't sit around and wait for a day because of weather typically. Sure, they'll find a way to get around it. It's a completely different sport. You can't have this event inside, so it's understandable. But the engineering and everything that's going into it, I think, especially as we get into this next generation car next year, hopefully they can fine-tune this where we can race in pretty much all conditions, and at that point, you get what you pay for. You're going to have the full experience. Even not getting the full experience, it was a great opportunity to get out and just experience the NASCAR in a road course environment, getting to have the access that we were able to have with just a general admission ticket. You can't beat that. It was just overall a fun weekend, even albeit a rain-shortened one.
I sat in the Cup race. I sat in turn 1 the whole time, in seats in the grandstands, but you certainly didn't have to have a reserved seat. There was plenty of places around the track, good views. On Saturday, we did a little bit more scouting, which we did talk about some in the rundown and whatnot. And there's a lot of good spots on that track to see some action, but a lot of those spots can come with a general admission ticket, which is fantastic and also cool when we try to check out Formula One when they come back, at least hopefully. So the track, I mean, like, I've been to the facility before. I knew it was a nice facility. I know it was your first time. You were very impressed with it. But to see a race and the Cup guys, I mean, honestly, a lot of us thought it was probably going to be kind of a wreck fest because these cars aren't really made for that style of track.
20 turns,
just super long. I mean, it was built for Formula One, essentially. And Cup cars are very different than Formula One. But the fact that they didn't, what really surprised me was there was very few incidents with the trucks or Xfinity series. They didn't race as much in the rain, obviously. Maybe that would have factored in a little bit more. But I think if Xfinity, I think they started on wets and immediately went to dries because the track was pretty much dry at that point. And there was really no cautions other than the stage breaks. I mean, there was no big wrecks. I thought turn 1 for sure would have a bunch of people plowing through. They all were able to get around it really well. So all in all, I really feel like the cars on the track were a success. And if it wasn't for the amount of rain that we got and everyone on TV had to experience, I think it would have been a much better results, not from the track's point of view, but from the fans' point of view. I think they would have really liked it a lot more.
It was a fun experience, that's for sure. Talking about some of the drivers that ended the day well at COTA, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, 2 guys that we expected. Joey Logano as well was 3rd. Then we get to Ross Chastain. It kind of made a nice, surprising run and looked solid. He was somebody I wasn't expecting to have such a great showing, but he's somebody that surprised me. He even led, 4 laps, I believe? So that's something that was really cool to see him kind of take maybe that next step. Allmendinger was 5th. So road course ringer, somebody I expected to see up there. Very cool to have that. Chase Briscoe, somebody we talked about that might step up in this environment. Finished, 6th. So very solid performance by him. So I don't think we were too far off on some of these guys. Michael McDowell, another road course kind of guy. He's somebody that we mentioned a couple weeks back to keep your eye on. There's a stretch of races coming up that he might be able to capitalize, and it started last week. I think he really did an awesome job in the race. There's some other guys on this list that you want to talk about the wrap up the remaining top 10.
Well, the last 3 guys would be Bowman, Reddick, and Kyle Busch. And I mean, Kyle Busch, you already mentioned it. He had 12 laps led. He won the Xfinity race. Really looked good. Had a great battle late with Chase Elliott, and I'm not quite sure why he finished 10th. I don't know if he came into pit and that's where he got put out. It's kind of hard to keep up with everything while you're at the track. And like I said, I hadn't been able to go back and rewatch it. But Bowman up there is not that much of a surprise. Reddick started on the pole. He didn't lead any laps, but he was strong most of the day. And he was actually running higher. I think he was fourth or so, third, fourth, fifth, somewhere around in there. And he spun out late in the race, got it back going, but obviously he finished ninth there. Wasn't really usable, didn't lead any laps. And we kind of mentioned that in our rundown. But I was a little worried there for a little bit because he was looking pretty good. So that's something to kind of keep in the back of our minds for future road courses. Really, to me, the only out of the top 10, nothing really surprised me. I think Allmendinger's not a surprise, but the fact that he was able to do that with Colleague Racing again. They also had a good, strong running at the Daytona Road Course last year. Obviously, we get new cars next year, so who knows exactly what we're going to get. But with Colleague Racing, they could have a pretty bright future at the Cup level in the near future if they keep putting down performances like this. So that was pretty impressive. But other than that, I mean, we pretty much talked about all these guys in a very positive way who did finish in the top 10 and ran well. I'd say really the biggest kind of disappointment other than Truex, which it's not really his fault. He did get up there and lead 3 laps. He had to work through traffic, of course. But Denny Hamlin, he did find his way up, I think, as high as 5th. I think he did make the top 5 at one point. But he never really looked great. I don't know if it's just the rain, the course. I don't really know, but we know he's a good road racer overall. So the fact that he finished 14th is a little surprising. I went fairly heavy on Hamlin. I think you may have as well. And he didn't kill you. He still finished 5 spots further ahead than he started. But, man, that was probably one of the bigger surprises of the slate.
It really was. Brad Keselowski's another guy who started pretty far back and really didn't progress too far through the field. Ended up on 5 positions ahead. So there's some guys that you would expect a little bit more out of at a track like that didn't really perform. But, hey, it's the first time for them to be there. I'm curious to see if NASCAR comes around in 2022 with the new generation car and see if that's something that they'd like to experiment with as well.
And I got to just say real quick, the late battle between Kyle Busch, Austin Cindric, and then eventually Chase Elliott, it was fun. I don't know how he came across on TV, how the coverage was, how much you could see. But for a few laps, we could see, okay, every time they come around turn 1, okay, that car's getting a little bit closer. You'd watch them kind of off in the distance. You'd see them make gains as they'd go away. They'd disappear for a little bit around the track. You'd see them on the back stretch making up a little gain, and then they kind of disappear, and then you'd see them come around the carousel, and they're like right there, and you're like, oh, shoot. And they come in the round 19 and 20, and from where at least I was sitting, I don't know about you. I know you were in the general admission side with your family. They disappeared around turn 19 and then right before turn 20, and you kind of see him come off that corner. And, Cindric put a good move on Kyle Busch there. Busch got him back, and then Elliott coming in and him having a nice battle with Kyle Busch. It was exciting, even though we only got to see about half of the battle just because of visibility. And we could see a little bit with the TV in front of us, but to be honest, the trackside coverage was not very good, so it was mostly what we could see with our eyes, and it was fun.
3.4 miles, though, so it is what it is. It was a great experience. Like I said, I'm excited to see if they come back, but yeah, your view in turn 1 is fantastic. There's not a bad spot in that facility for sure. But we're on to the next race, Charlotte Motor Speedway. It's going to be something very fun, a night race, 600 miles. So we're talking endurance. I know this is one of those crown jewel races that people want to throw around and talk about. This is a special race, very special, very iconic. It's going to be fun. There's a couple oddities with the way that they're doing it compared to a normal race. One of them being that there's going to be 4 stages of 100 laps each. You want to take away a little bit about what your perspective and what you're expecting out of this? Your viewpoint
kind of
going
a
into the
loaded
week.
question. We're gonna be in for an endurance race is really what it comes down to. 600 miles is the longest, track or the race of the year. Last year we went into overtime. Great finish. But that was the longest race in NASCAR history with the extra couple laps. It's late on Sunday. It's after the 500, the Indy 500. So it's always kind of fun to go back to back. Obviously, some drivers have done that in the past. Most notably, Tony Stewart and Kurt Busch recently. There was also Robbie Gordon. Some of you guys may know him. He did it a ton. But Stewart was actually really good at it. Finished top 10 in both attempts that he did at both races.
Yep.
Just Iron Man. But you kind of expect that from Tony Stewart. That kind of fits his personality. I mean, you're doing 1,100 miles in one day, not including the flight from Indianapolis to Charlotte. So I couldn't imagine. But yeah, it's going to be kind of a long race. I mean, get in, settle in, maybe take a little late nap because you're going to be up kind of late, to be honest. But each stage being 100 laps, there'll be long green flag runs, but at least you get some breaks and kind of can reset your car and refill your drink or whatever you got to do. But endurance is definitely the key here. I know a lot of guys have talked about this week putting extra emphasis on hydrating, getting the nutrition on point, making sure they have something to eat in the car, whether it's like some sort of energy gummy type thing. I'm sure they're not having, steak dinner or anything while they're driving around these cars. But yeah, it's really endurance, and you expect a lot of these tough guys, as long as they keep their car clean, you'll see a lot of these just the tough guys towards the end. I mean, that's why we saw just a couple years ago Truex out there lead. I think it was like 395 out of 400 laps one year. Sucked if you didn't play him that year because you definitely weren't winning any money. But it's a fun race. I mean, it's really supportive of our troops. Really kind of it's almost like a second 4th of July type race. NASCAR really makes a big deal out of it.
It is a big deal, and it's going to be a fun race to watch. We're going back to qualifying this week. That's something that they're doing. So we had qualifying last week. This week we will as well. So we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. Since we don't have the qualifying data, we'll be making sure that we get that to you in the race day rundown. That'll be available on race day. We'll go into detail, give you our impact scores, and really have a lot more specific information relative to the DraftKings angle, and just know more about who will have a greater impact on the race. So that will be available. Make sure you subscribe and check that out on race day. But to get into the conversation a little bit more, qualifying is going to be huge. That's going to be really big on who we're targeting, but there's a lot of information available to us that we can dive into to kind of already have an idea of who some of the favorites might be.
Well, that's the thing. You need to identify who's in the recent history and similar tracks are good, and then wait for their qualifying positions because we will know their salaries, so we kind of know how to construct lineups. Because trying to build a lineup right now, while it's still fun and you can still theoretically build good lineups, if some of these guys, your value guys, start too high, it may not be worth it anymore. Or someone that you were going to kind of fade, one of these high priced guys, but they end up qualifying like 26. Well, guess what? They're going to be, 70% owned or something like that. And if they finish top 5, well, then guess what? You're going to need them too. So we cannot get anywhere near a complete lineup with the information that we have. Like you said, we need to know who really to pay attention, especially if you are watching qualifying. You really need to pay attention to how the cars are getting around the track too, and that can take kind of some patience. Obviously, qualifying is not necessarily fun to watch But what are the guys doing? Are they, are they sawing the wheel back and forth when they're going around a corner? Is the car set up real loose? Are they, did they have a moment on the track and so they finished 26 or qualified 26? And you're thinking, well, man, maybe they just don't have the speed. Maybe I should fade them because they don't have the speed. But it's only because they were getting too much out of the car. Or did they run a perfect line and they were slow? All those things are really important. And I think if you're playing DraftKings or even going to throw down some single bets, you should watch qualifying to really pay attention to how the cars are doing, and practice as well. Obviously, we want to look at some of the practice data, but especially qualifying, because that's really going to show us some speed.
And that's the extra benefit I think we have whenever we get into like these type of situations, because that's what we're here for. We're NASCAR aficionados first. That's what we've grown up enjoying and loving. And then the DraftKings angle came in a little bit later, and we've been able to master our craft at that over the last half a decade or whatever. So,
and I'd say they're two different skill sets.
It is.
That you need to learn how to bridge together, because you had to have strategy and understanding on both sides.
And that's why we're here. We want to help trying to give you some of the information that we've been able to put together after many, many years and many, many attempts at this. And we think this kind of I guess, week could lend itself to us being able to maybe dial it in a little bit closer than some of these other people, because we can have that extra time to put our eyes on the car, look at additional data that is relative to that week. So I'm excited to put together our impact scores this week, kind of have an idea based on the salary and where they ultimately qualify, who will find their path to value the easiest. But we can look at the top of the slate right now and kind of talk about some of these drivers. Kyle Larson's at the top. He's somebody that we're going to definitely talk about a lot, I'm sure, come race day rundown, because at $11,300, he's somebody that has a really good history at 550 tracks. That's where we're at, 550 horsepower on this 1.5 mile track. He's somebody we're going to have to pay attention to where he qualifies, because he could come out on the pole, on the front row, and establish himself early on as a dominator. There are 400 laps available, so there are a lot of potential performance points, 280 of them, in fact. So something to definitely pay attention to. Your thoughts on Kyle Larson and some of the strategy behind that, because there are quite a few performance points available this week.
Well, his last two 600 performances have not been particularly that good. He does have a driver rating of 91.2, which is 8th best, but that's comparing him to mostly guys with 3 races. Reddick's at 7th right now with the 1 race. But Kyle Larson's average finish is 20th and average start is 18th. He does have 1 top 10. But again, that's an old equipment, Chip Ganassi equipment. Different story this year when we kind of switch over to just 1.5 miles. Now, we can't take this as gospel, because Charlotte Motor Speedway is a different track than what we've been racing at so far with 1.5 miles. They're not all the same. They have different little characteristics. Kyle Larson is averaging a 6.5 finish, including a win, 3 top 5s in the 4.5 mile races this year. His average laps led is 127 and 61.5 fastest laps, and that's across 4 races. 132.6 driver rating, and the second best guy is at 112. Really not even close. And 112 is still really good. He's got a big lead on the third place guy. Larson has just dominated so far on 550 mile and a halves, 105.2 average DraftKings points. Unless I find it there's very few scenarios that I could think of where you don't want to have some exposure to Kyle Larson, unless you're just going to say he's going to get in a wreck or something. If you can predict the future like that, then go right ahead. But if we're just basing it off of statistics, Larson is, you have to play Larson in at least a few of your lineups, because you cannot argue with this data. This is recent data. William Byron would be the next best guy that I mentioned at 112, which is his teammate, Hendrick Motorsports. Bowman would be at 9th, and Chase Elliott's 11th. Hendrick's been really good at 550. type tracks at a mile and a half. That is, Larson he's a stud this week.
He is,
despite the high price tag.
There's a reason he is 11,300 this week. We'll find out exactly where he qualifies to find out just how much value he could accrue over the length of this race. Martin Truex is the next guy on the list. Based on some of those stats you just put out there, he is somebody to talk about too because he's got 4 top 10s.
Before we get to him, I pulled this up just to kind of drive it home to people. So I pulled all large 1.5 mile ovals. They're going to be very similar to Charlotte Motor Speedway from 2019, including up through 21. Now, Larson only has 10 races because he obviously missed all of last year. Almost everyone else has 18. But even in those 10 races, he's still averaging 61 laps led and 30.7 fastest laps. 62.4 DraftKings points. Yeah, a lot of that came from these 4 races so far in Hendrick equipment, but there's at least 6 races in Chip Ganassi equipment. You're not pulling those numbers down that far. He can get around these types of tracks. Sorry, continue.
It is definitely one of the style of tracks that he is very comfortable at. But Martin Truex is no slouch either at 11,100. He's got 4 top 10s in the 4 races in that span as well. So he's somebody to talk about. His driver rating is up there, I think, the top 6 or so. He's been very strong this year. He's got 3 wins. We're going to have to see where he qualifies, but I think he's somebody that could be a nice alternative to Kyle Larson this week.
Well, those 3 wins, though, came on 750 tracks.
Absolutely.
Shorter tracks. You race them differently. But if we're comparing the 600s, though, and Martin Truex's last 3 Coca-Cola 600s, average finish is 3.3, including a win, 2 top 5s, and all 3 races were in the top 10. Very impressive. 58 fastest laps, 67, almost 68 laps led, and the second best driver rating over the last 3 Coke 600s, just barely behind his teammate. He's at 126.6, and Kyle Busch, his teammate's at 127.4. Joe Gibbs, and he also has a win too. We'll get to him in just a minute. But Joe Gibbs has also been really good at these kind of tracks, but in particular the 600.
You mentioned Joe Gibbs. I'm interested to hear the Denny Hamlin perspective because he doesn't have the hottest stats if you look at the most recent history, but he's been really strong this year, albeit most of it, in my view, it was 750 horsepower package. But consistently throughout the season, they've been really, really, really strong. He's $10,800. I think he's going to be somebody that a lot of people might be on, but I'm going to want to see qualifying and some practice to see how he's getting around. And last week he was hurting, but we'll see what this week holds. What are your opinions on Denny Hamlin going into this week?
Well, his stats going to be a little bit skewed because last year to start the race, and I had forgotten about it, but we had watched a little tape earlier this week. And I believe, I cannot remember. I remember it happening now. I think I had quite a bit of Hamlin last year in my lineup because I was like, he's looking good. And they had a piece of tungsten fall out literally right after they started the cars and got on the track. They had to come in and fix it. I think they came back out like 4 or 5 laps down. Their day was essentially done at that point. You can't make up that many laps on a mile and a half typically. So his stats are probably a little bit skewed from that because if you look at the last 3, his average finish is 16.7. Not impressive. Only 1 top 5 and really only 1 top 15. 2 top 20s. So obviously he had the 1 bad race. He is averaging 26.3 fastest laps, but only 10 laps led. 81.9 driver rating. Not that great, but he is the 3rd best driver according to driver rating at mile and a half so far this year with an average finish of 7.8. No wins, of course, but 2 top 5s. I don't really know. I think a lot will. I think Hamlin is one of those guys we really have to rely on practice and qualifying data to see what we're going to potentially get out of that car. I don't think we have to do that as much with Truex. I don't think we have to do that as much with Larson. We know they've been fast. We know these are his types of tracks, and they are pretty good here, both of them. So with Hamlin, to me, it's like because he's the third highest priced driver, we need to see what we're getting before we want to just slam him in there. Because if he's starting, 6th, but his practice times are more like 10th, well, he might get a top 10. But if he doesn't get out front and lead, that's too high of a price to pay. There's really no value there. So that's what that's my opinion on Hamlin, is you're just really going to have to look at the data on him.
It's going to be interesting to watch all this qualifying, and I think this week is going to be really a fun week for us. We're going to be rushing to get all the content out. We'll be putting out our race guide as well a little bit late, but it will be full of this information. We'll have driver pools available, some I guess a couple lineups, core builds, if you will, on that as well. But going back to the drivers, Chase Elliott is somebody that's probably going to be close to a favorite after winning last week. He's got the win. He's in the playoffs. They raced here twice at Charlotte last year, and he won the 300 miler, and that was great for him. But he was dominant here last year for portions of this race, but didn't get the win based on some strategy. And strategy is going to be key again this year, this week. He's somebody at $10,500. He's a discount, almost $1,000 from his teammate Kyle Larson. It's going to be interesting to see how much ownership he carries this week. I'm really going to keep an eye on where he qualifies. How about yourself? What are your views of Chase Elliott this week?
Very similar to Hamlin. Really want to just kind of see the data, but I have more confidence in him here, even though his data is going to be just a little skewed over the last three 600s. Well, really not. I mean, he's the third best driver according to driver rating with an average finish of 6. But he's not the best statistically so far this year on 1.5 mile tracks. He's down there a little bit. So I wouldn't react too much to that because this is a track he's good at. The win will help. They'll probably free them up a little bit to be more confident to take some chances. And, of course, they're just going to come in with a ton of confidence, knowing that they basically won that race last year. If it wasn't for his teammate having a tire issue late, bringing out a caution late, and then them coming down to pit and several drivers staying out, I think he restarted like 10th and finished 3rd in 2 laps. It's hard to do in a mile and a half starting that far back. And with the momentum he was coming, he would have been in first by the time they hit the backstretch if they did one more lap. There was no doubt. Maybe even by turn 1. And he was right there. Him, Johnson, and then obviously Brad winning last year. Obviously, we won't know until we see them out on the track exactly what they're going to roll off with. But Hendrick is on a roll. I would not be surprised to see at least 3, maybe all 4 of the drivers finish top 10. And also wouldn't be surprised if all 4 drivers lead the race at some point. It's a long race. There'll be lots of different strategies, green flag, pit stops. Obviously, the 3 stage breaks compared to the normal 2. That's going to really play a part in different strategies. So I think Hendrick, they're in a great spot, and I think Chase Elliott's in a great spot. But for me, it comes down to what we see in practice on him, just like Hamlin.
Well, we've talked about a couple Hendrick drivers already. We've talked about a couple Gibbs drivers already, and here comes another Gibbs driver in Kyle Busch. $10,200. He's somebody that's really strong. Any way you slice the data, really at a mile and a half, looking at Charlotte data, 600 data, it's impressive to dig into it from Kyle Busch. So I'm another one of these guys that I'm going to really focus on during the weekend to figure out about how much I want to go in on him and how impactful I think he will be based on where he qualifies, seeing some of the practice times. You want to dive into some of the data on Kyle Busch and why he might be somebody to keep an eye on this week?
Well, he's got the best average finish in the last 3 600s at 3. That includes a win, and that means he also has 3 top 5s. Very strong. His average laps led is 152 and 67.3 fastest laps. I already mentioned he had the highest driver rating. He's also averaging 115.7 DraftKings points. He's been a stud, and that includes last year, obviously, in his down year. He's already got a win at 1.5 miles this year at Kansas. Out of the 4 races, he's got 3 top 5s. Now, fastest laps only averaging 11.5, laps led only averaging 5 in those 4 races, and driver rating, it puts him at 6th best at 101.9. But an average finish of 4.8. So I don't know if we'll see those dominating numbers that we saw in the past 300 or the past 600 races, the last 3 600 races. But I think where he's at right now this year, got the Xfinity win at COTA, led a lot of laps, second most laps out at COTA. I think Kyle Busch is starting to come back into his own. The team we already mentioned, they're really good here. Unless we just see something in practice that puts him off. And then also having practice, that's another big advantage to Kyle Busch. That was a very tough thing for that team for whatever reason last year. They really come to the track with something that they don't end up usually racing with. But when you can't adjust it, you get what you get. So I think Kyle Busch is going to be really in play. Even if he starts up front, that I think he could still lead, but obviously his track data so far this year wouldn't suggest that.
Speaking of track data, I think Kevin Harvick's somebody that's in a very interesting spot this week, $10,000. Going over the data, he jumps out in some spots and then kind of sinks in some spots. I really want to see what kind of speed they show up with this weekend and gauge that, because there's so much stuff going on with that team this year. They've gotten slowly better. I want to kind of see if they are able to fine-tune from practice into qualifying and see if they are able to make any adjustments. And that might be something that I might get turned on more to Kevin Harvick. Right now, I'm going to tap the brakes a little bit because there's guys that are below him, above him, that I think are way more solid values, but it's Kevin Harvick. We don't know where he's going to be. I'm interested to see. What are your thoughts on Kevin Harvick so far going into this week?
I don't know, because when we look at the data I mentioned earlier from 2019 to including this year and 1.5 mile tracks, he's the best driver. It's close between him and Kyle Busch, according to driver rating, 107.3 versus 105.2. But Harvick's average finish in those 1.5 miles, those 18 races, 7.8, only 2 wins, but 8 top 5s, 14 top 10s. He's got averaging quite a few fastest laps, averaging 44.5 laps led. He's been a stud, but then when we flip over and just highlight this year so far, he only comes in as the 8th best driver, but he's still averaging 9.3 finish. I think unless we see some really good speed out of him, top 3 speed, where we're like, okay, they finally got it dialed in. Unless we see that, if we don't get him starting outside the top 10 at that price tag, I don't know if it really makes too much sense. Because he hasn't shown the ability to really get out front and lead. He's not getting a ton of fastest laps. I think he can still have a solid top 10 run, and the team would be proud of it, maybe even a top 5. But again, if you're not getting him, if he only finishes 5th or 6th, and he's not starting 11th or 12th or something like that, I don't know if I see the upside that I would have seen in Kevin Harvick in the past.
I think you hit a whole bunch of very valid points and things to keep an eye on headed into the weekend. So, again, that's why I think we're very similar on the same page with Harvick.
And just I didn't even notice this till just now. In the last 3 600s, his average finish is 18.7. 2 top 10s, but no top 5s. Not really getting fastest laps, not really getting laps led. And obviously there's 400 laps to get those. Might be one of those pump the brakes on Harvick, but don't completely take your eye off of him this week.
We're looking at Brad Keselowski next. He is 9,700, and he is last year's 600 winner. you look at the data, he sticks out in some spots, and then some spots just kind of average. He's one of those tough guys, though. I think that this could benefit as the race gets further along. There's a lot of stuff to unpack here. He's the first Penske driver we've talked about. Is he your favorite Penske driver on the slate, or is there somebody that you might look to elsewhere? And what about Brad Keselowski kind of stood out when we went through the numbers?
Well, he won last year. His average finish in the last 3 here or in the 600 is 8th, 2 top 5s, averaging 33 laps led, 23.3 fastest laps, just shy of 100 driver rating. He's at 99.5. Statistically, he's the best Penske in the 600s. Blaney's right below him in driver rating, but his average finish is 17.7. So Blaney has struggled here more. Logano has a top 5, but does not have a win, and his average finish is 12.7. Logano's been pretty good this year, but really though, it's mostly been in the 750 package. Blaney's not bad, but Brad would be statistically kind of the best in the 550 so far this year compared to his teammates. But there are several drivers that have outperformed Brad in these 550 package. So I don't really know. He's kind of struggled the last few races. We thought he would. We knew we didn't feel like he would win COTA. Although as crazy as that ending kind of was with the shortening, you never know. But he didn't really make up a ton of ground. I mean, he had a lot of PD upside. It was a tough track to pass. And even tougher in the rain, so I will for sure cut him slack. But still, he didn't really perform that well in the last few races. I don't quite understand. I don't know if he's got other things going on. So I don't really like that kind of excuse when people give that, like, oh, he's got stuff going off on the outside the track, he can't perform. It's like, when you're in the car, what else are you really thinking about? What your next move is career-wise? Probably not. You're thinking about the race. So if he is focused on what's going on in the car this week, in these last few races, and they're getting this performance, and I guess they're off a little bit. Might be, but if Brad has a bad qualifying run, has good practice time, but has a bad qualifying run and qualifies outside the top 15, yeah, you're going to want to use them, because we're going to be looking for probably solid PD upsides, because we know we're going to get, in most cases, unless we count the Truex domination, we're going to get 2 dominators at least in this race. So we'll be looking for these PD guys. I don't see Brad as being that dominator, but if we can get him starting outside the top 10, for sure the top 15, I think he really comes in play. Otherwise, that price tag probably going to be building other ways.
Speaking of dominators, there's a couple guys that we're getting ready to talk about that could potentially fall into that range. We're going to need some folks or some drivers under that $10,000 price tag that have an ability to potentially dominate to help get the performance points we need to stand out. Alex Bowman is one that potentially could. He's one of those guys that seems to be on point every other week or so, and this week could be a week. He's also got some numbers here, but he's not the greatest. That it doesn't jump out at you all over the place, but you go back and watch some races and he finds himself in the mix. You want to go into some of the stats on him and what your thoughts are and what you're looking for before we see qualifying and practice this week?
He's the 3rd best driver in the last 3 600s. 4th best driver, right below Chase Elliott, his teammate. He's at 100 driver rating. Average finish is 12th, no top 5s, but he does have 2 top 10s. He's also run much better this year than he did last year and the year before. Not terrible this year in the 1.5s, but his average finish is 14.3 and only 1 top 5. He has been more of a 750 driver than a 550. Not getting fastest laps, hasn't led any laps in these 1.5 miles. I think he's one of those guys, again, if you can get some nice PD upside, sure. But let's not forget, in the last few weeks, it's kind of been every other. You get a really good race out of him, a winning race, and then he disappoints. He finishes outside the top 15. And then a really good race. He's been the most inconsistent Hendrick car, but he has the most wins. So I don't know what we're going to get out of Bowman this week. I think a lot of it will just depend on, like a few of the other guys I've already mentioned, what do they do in practice, and then where are they starting is going to be really crucial on how much ownership you play to Bowman. Because I think he's worth, if you're going to play at least 20 lineups, I think he's worth being in at least 1 to 2 of those, if not a few more. But a lot will depend on where does he start.
It's going to be interesting. There's a lot, like you said, that we still have to wait to find out. But I think William Byron, the next guy on the list, is somebody to really keep an eye on throughout the weekend. He's been strong this year, been very, very strong in his Hendrick setup. He's been good in both 550, 750 environments. This is something to see if he can take that next step. He was in the mix last year, blew a tire, unfortunately spun out late, caused a caution to make it go to overtime. This, at his price tag, could be something to be that second dominator. It's going to be fun to watch. I'm excited to see where he actually qualifies, if he can get on that front row where he's been a couple times already this year. What are your thoughts on William Byron?
Oh, I'd pick him easily over Bowman right now. If I'm just blind building lineups, not factoring in starting positions and all that other stuff. He's tied with the best average. Well, actually, sorry, Truex. Actually, no, 2 other guys. But he is tied with his teammate Larson at 6.5 average finish on the 4 races. He has a win. He only has 1 top 5, but he has 4 top 10s. He's second best on driver rating at 112. And now a lot of these laps led and fastest laps came from Homestead, which is a different type of mile and a half compared to Charlotte. But he's still averaging it, the way it breaks down, 21.5 fastest and 32.3 laps led. He's, like I said, out of the last 4, he's the second best driver according to driver rating. Why wouldn't you consider him? And he finished, I think, 11th, was running top 10 most of the race in COTA. So his top 10 streak is, broken, but he finished 11. It wasn't like he finished 20th. So you factor that in. I don't know I'd have to look what he's at for the year, but I think he's got the most top 10s out of everybody. He's been one of the most consistent drivers to date. And yeah, he didn't have the best history at the 600s, but also he has not performed this year like he has in years past. He's been much better this year. I think that 24 is going to be a fast car, and who knows, he may be the dominator this year. He did it at Homestead. He could easily lead 100 laps or so. Not saying he will, but if we can get a little PD upside from him, knowing William Byron, he's probably going to start on the front row. That's kind of what he does. So it's going to make it very difficult on how much exposure, because he could kind of drop back and have a solid race at 7th or 8th and may not be really worth it. So hard to say what we get out of Byron, but I would feel much more confident locking him into lineups compared to his teammate Alex Bowman.
We're going to need multiple dominators. I think he's one to definitely keep an eye on. The next guy, Ryan Blaney, he's somebody to potentially watch as well. He's $9,000. He's got to win this style of track this year. So it's going to be interesting to kind of find an idea of where he falls in. We've only talked about Brad Keselowski and that Penske stable so far. What are your thoughts on Ryan Blaney this week? Because there's going to be some interesting guys in this price range that we're talking about. You want a little bit of exposure to a few of them. He's somebody that I want to keep an eye on before we really get any information.
Ryan Blaney has a win in a mile and a half this year, Atlanta, and that was a race that Kyle Larson dominated, and he came down and ran him down at the end of the race. He does have 2 top 5s in those 4 races, with an average or a driver rating of 99.6, which would make him 7th best. but his average finish is 14th. Not getting a ton of fastest laps and getting even fewer laps led. I have a hard time, and then if we flip on over to the last 3 600s, I mentioned earlier his average finish is 17.7 and his average start is 17.7. Not a bad driver rating, 6th best out of these drivers, but there's not a lot jumping out to me that says you got to play Blaney. The only thing I see is potentially being a little overlooked compared to some guys around him in the driver's slate. Maybe he starts a little higher up, so that makes a lot of people fade off of him more. You play him as a contrarian. Or he starts or qualifies further back, and he becomes more of a PD upside play. Because I think he could still crack top 12, top 10. But there's not a lot telling me, based on recent history, both this year and in years past, that says Blaney is a lock for Charlotte. But obviously we know Blaney has the talent and the equipment to hurt you if you don't play him. So he's a tough guy to really kind of figure out this year. But right now I would be kind of leaning not so heavy on Blaney.
Well, we know the next guy on the list, I think, is going to be one of the last guys we talk about before we jump around to some guys that we want to point out lower down in the range. But Joey Logano, $8,800. I haven't seen him priced this low in quite some time.
Very surprising.
Some of the data isn't the most impressive, but at $8,800, Joey Logano is somebody that you might want to see where he qualifies, because even if he qualifies in the top 10, he doesn't have to do a whole heck of a lot to reach value. And then if he starts further back than that and is able to drive up through the field, he offers great place differential as well. So what are your thoughts on Joey Logano? Because he's somebody that I've got starred as one of my key drivers to pay attention to throughout the weekend.
Just trying to look over something real quick. Not seeing him. He has been another one of those guys that has been, he's been much better in 750 this year. Been honestly kind of pretty poor in the 550 package. I understand why DraftKings has him at 8,800, but I think he's in play at 8,800 because he doesn't have to do nearly as much. But he's the 15th ranked driver this year on mile and a halfs, according to driver rating, at 81.1. So you have guys like Austin Dillon, Chris Buescher, Kurt Busch, Matty D. All those are great racers, but I wouldn't put them ahead of Joey Logano as far as equipment and talent. But all those guys have better driver ratings on mile and a halfs this year. His average finish is 16.5, and he only has one top 10, two top 15s. If we flip over to the 600s, just to see if there's any difference, much higher on the driver rating list. He comes in that 9th best, but it's still only a 88.1 out of the last 3. One top 5, two top 15s, with an average finish of 12.7. He's not getting fastest laps really, and he's not really getting much laps led. But it's Logano, and we know if they get that set up just right or play some strategy just right, he can hurt you. But he is another guy that I would for sure pump the brakes on and be considering very, very low ownership, building a 1 to 2 strategic lineups kind of around him to see if he hits. But I'm not that high on Logano this year based on recent data and this year's data. It doesn't look good for Logano on the 550 package, but that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to be the best at 750 because the last 2 races of the year are Martinsville, going to be a 750 package, and Phoenix, 750 package. So they know what they're doing. They're just sacrificing some good quality finishes and runs at these 550 packages. But that's good for us because then we can kind of identify that and be like, okay, we'll go lighter on Logano, but that opens up the door for some of these other guys we talked about, and then some of these other guys lower on the list. But if Logano starts 30th because he spun out in qualifying or something, then you're going to play Logano. So it's situational, but if it's kind of right there on the edge, decent starting position, but not a high upside, I would probably lean to passing on Logano.
That's why I've got him starred. I kind of want to see where he qualifies, really pay attention, because that $8,800 mark, it's going to be interesting to see where he starts. The next guy I really want to talk about is Tyler Reddick. He's somebody that, as of late, has really improved his finishing spots. He's been very strong. He actually had a great finish in the top 10 here at the 600 last year. This seems to suit his style of race, and he also that team has been pretty strong in 550 horsepower configurations. There's a lot to be had at $8,200 potentially, if depending on how the qualifying shakes up on Saturday.
Sorry, I was sorting stuff. We're talking about Reddick.
Yeah, Reddick.
Yeah, in the last 600 last year, he finished 9th, and he started 5th. Had 4 fastest laps, no laps led. But his driver rating was 94.4, which makes him the 7th best in recent data. But again, that's skewed because that's one race compared to most of these guys are at 3. Only 33 points. I'd have to go back and see what his salary was. But that's a good run to start 5th, finish 9th. That's really good. But Charlotte's not that much of a rim, right around the rim kind of track. I mean, I guess you can do it, but that's not usually, from what I've seen, kind of the preferred grooves. I'm sure he'll try it, and he may be successful at it. But Reddick's going to be one of those guys, also very situational. If he starts too high up and doesn't have the practice data to support those longer run speeds, then I'm going to be light on Reddick. But if he has good long run speeds in his practice time but doesn't fire off well, which means he may not qualify that well, and we get him starting 13th, 14th, 15th, well, now he's potentially back in play. So it's really, when we get to this part of the slate, especially without knowing starting positions yet, and obviously not able to use practice data yet, it's very, very situational on do you want to play these guys or not. And right now I would kind of lean Reddick will probably qualify fairly well. So I'd probably lean being a little cautious on Reddick. But, one race starting or finish 9th, that's really good.
What about his teammate, Austin Dillon? So I talked about RCR being fairly strong in the 550 package. I think he's somebody that, based on the starting salary, $7,700, could be well in the mix. You want to talk about some of the data that Austin Dillon has headed into this week at Charlotte?
Well, recently at the 600, not that great for Austin Dillon. But if we were to go back one more year, I think it was, he won the race. In 2000, the 1.5 miles so far this year, the 4 races, his average finish is 10th. That includes 2 top 10s, and all those races have been inside the top 15 for a finish. His average fastest lap is only 2.8. He hasn't led yet, so we're not expecting him to dominate. But Austin Dillon's when you look at his track history, he's pretty decent at these 1.5 miles. Obviously, he's going to have these bad races here and there. But the fact that he's top 10 so far this year in driver rating on these 1.5 miles at 87.7 and 38 average DraftKings points, that's really, really solid. And I think if we can get Dillon, even if you get Dillon starting top 10, because it's Dillon and the way people perceive him and the way we also usually perceive him too, you're going to be really reluctant to play him because it's like, very little upside. But if he starts 8th and finishes 6th, which is totally within his and that team's capability, he will probably be fairly low owned. You might get a good little value play there out of Austin Dillon because he doesn't have to do that much. You just kind of want him to at least get a few positions up and have a nice top 10 day, and you're set.
I agree, and you mentioned value plays. We really don't have a good grasp until we see qualifying on who in the muddy middle will be worth the value or worth the play to reach value, but somebody towards the bottom of the salary board that I was really excited to see his price tag was Michael McDowell, $5,800 for somebody that I think might have a strong ownership this week because he has quite a bit of a good performance history on the in the 550 horsepower setup this year. They've been really strong in that configuration, and last week he was able to manage a top 10, albeit a road course, but this is the stretch that we talked about where we think he could be a lot more impactful on these races like we saw earlier in the year. Not by any means do we think he's potentially going to win all these races, but he adds much needed value in a path that we think is fairly solid. $5,800, you want to tell him why we think he could find some, I guess, an easy path to value at $5,800 this week?
It's, for me, I'm not as sold on McDowell as you are, but I do like McDowell. But the thing that worries me is him starting too high up, because so far his average start is 8th so this year at 1.5 miles, and his average finish is 13.8. I like that 13.8. That looks really good, but we need Michael McDowell to start 15th, 16th, 17th, and then get around that 12th, 13th place finish, which certainly can do. It's a long race. You may see some of these other good guys have issues, wreck out. Certainly within the realm of possibility, but it is tough because he has one top 10, which is nice, out of those 4 races, 2 top 5s, and all 4 have been in the top 20. So we know he can get a good finish. It's really going to depend on where he starts because we need value. Like you said, he was $5,800. You want to lock him in at that price, but again, if he ends up qualifying, which he can do, top 10, top 5, it makes it a very hesitant play. But you might still have to risk it this week because we don't have a ton of cheap plays. At least what we've seen so far, we don't have a ton of cheap plays that we like. But I think McDowell, I mean, he's been, when you look at some of the other analytics, he's been one of the best on 550s. That's kind of what this team has kind of dialed it in on. He obviously has the win at Daytona, which they use the 550 package, but very different style of racing. Good finish at Talladega, but again, different type of racing. But the team has been really pretty strong on these types of tracks, but it really will depend on how good or how bad he qualifies if I go over kind of exposed on him.
There's still a lot of unknowns left, but we wanted to make sure that we filled people in on who we were on headed into the race. Again, we will be able to give you some additional information with the race day rundown on race day, so make sure you check that out. The race guide will also be part of what we're putting out again this week. We'll have a lot of visual information to go along with the data that we talk about. It'll have our DK impact in there, along with our driver spotlight, some drivers that we're high on, and then some cautionary drivers that we want to warn you about based on what we went throughout the week, and then based on where they're qualifying as well. All of that will be updated and made available. So make sure you check out the links below to our social medias to follow along. We're really active on Twitter. We did our Twitter giveaway last week, gave away a box of 2020 Don Russ Racing. That was a lot of fun, and we really appreciate all the engagement that was able to garner, and really, truly appreciate all the new subscribers and followers there. It's been fun. Is there anything you want to add in regards to Charlotte? I know it's a night race. I'm excited for that. It's going to add an extra element. 600 miles of crazy action. I'm super stoked.
Yeah, we covered a lot. I think for me, it's just trying to clear the schedule to be able to watch some of the Indy 500. I know that's going to be exciting. I think Jimmy, he's doing some broadcasting from the booth with Danica. Both obviously have Indy Series ties. I have a feeling Johnson will probably be running the Indy 500 next year, even though he said he wasn't going to be doing these ovals. So that's going to be cool. And then obviously afterwards, a few hours after that, then we get the Coke 600. and just a classic, iconic race, but it is long, so just be prepared for that. But it's in the evening, so you should have enough time to kind of do the stuff you need to do during the day. Hopefully you're not working on Monday, so it doesn't really matter. You can sleep in. The biggest thing for me is I just hope they don't get rain, because we're not getting rain racing if it starts raining. And I know there's a little chance of rain, so I really hope they get this in on Sunday. We don't have a Monday race, but thankfully, and at least I'm off. I know I can watch it if it goes to Monday, but hopefully not.
Well, that's about all we've got. I'm excited too. We'll just have to wait and see, and we'll be back for the race day rundown. But that's all I've got. I'm Joe, that's Jeremy, and this is the DK Garage.